Brielle Whitmore realized she was completely alone the moment the tour bus disappeared behind the curve of the Amalfi Cliffs. "Oh no, 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 no," she muttered, spinning in a slow circle on the cobblestone street, gripping her guidebook like it was a lifeline. They said 10 minutes. She had wandered off to take a picture of a cat lounging on a Vespa of all things, and now her group was gone. Her phone was dead, her Italian was limited to ciao and grazie, and her hotel address was in the backpack that had been left on the bus. This was not part of the plan. She had saved for this trip for 2 years, and this day was supposed to be the highlight, Ravello, the town of music and mountains. Instead, she was stranded. "Are you all right?" The voice came from behind her, deep, smooth, distinctly American. Brielle turned to find a man standing a few feet away. Tall, dark-haired, with aviators pushed up on top of his head and a linen shirt rolled up at the sleeves. His accent was American, but his energy screamed something else, entirely confident, composed, like he had never gotten lost a day in his life. "I lost my tour group," she said, trying not to sound as panicked as she felt. The man stepped closer. "Well, that's inconvenient." "Want help finding them?" She hesitated. "You don't have to, I'm Colton Vale," he said, offering his hand. "I'm also a tourist, and I was just about to head toward the main piazza anyway. Safety in numbers." Brielle shook his hand. "Firm grip, warm skin." "Brielle," she replied, and "Yeah, okay." "Thanks." They walked side by side down the narrow path that wound between stone buildings and lemon trees. The heat clung to her skin, the scent of citrus and sea breeze swirling in the air. He didn't ask too many questions, just made a few casual observations about the town, pointing out a bell tower and a little bakery tucked between 2 staircases. "You're not from around here," she finally said, glancing at him. "Nope, New York. I come to Italy once a year." "Once a year. Must be nice. You travel a lot?" she asked. He nodded, nonchalant. "Yeah, work keeps me moving." "What do you do?" He paused. "Real estate, investment side." Brielle didn't press. She didn't need to know the details. He was just a kind stranger helping her get back on track. They reached the piazza, and Brielle scanned the crowd. No sign of the red umbrellas her group carried. She dug into her tote bag again. No charger, no map, no wallet. She cursed under her breath. "Still no luck?" Colton asked gently. "I'm officially the dumbest traveler alive," she muttered. He smiled, not in a mocking way, but like he was genuinely amused. "You're not dumb, you're just having a memorable experience." "I'd rather have a boring one with gelato right now," she sighed. "Well," he gestured toward the tiny cafe on the corner, "that I can help with." She blinked. "You're serious?" Completely. He bought her a double scoop of pistachio and lemon sorbetto without blinking at the price or asking her to pay him back. They sat on the edge of a fountain, watching children chase pigeons while a man nearby strummed a guitar. "You travel alone often?" he asked. Brielle shrugged. "First time, was supposed to be this solo find-yourself adventure. So far I've found a sunburn, a lost backpack, and the world's most expensive gelato." Colton laughed, a warm, easy sound that made her stomach flip unexpectedly. "What were you hoping to find?" "I don't know." "Something different. Life's been the same for a long time." He nodded like he understood. They spent the next hour wandering the town. He showed her a hidden garden he'd stumbled on earlier that morning, a viewpoint that looked out over the sea. She forgot, briefly, that she was lost. It wasn't until they reached a boutique near the edge of town that Brielle's stomach dropped. Her tour group. She saw them through the glass, clustered by the jewelry counter. She turned to Colton, suddenly reluctant. "I think that's them," she said quietly. He followed her gaze and nodded. "Looks like you're saved." She offered him a small smile. "Thank you, really, I don't know what I would have done." "Dinner," she blinked. "What? You can thank me by having dinner with me tonight." Brielle stared at him, heart thudding in her chest. "You're serious?" "I'm not the type to let a beautiful woman wander back into her group without at least trying to see her again." She tried to think of something clever to say. Her mouth opened, then closed again. "Yes," she said finally. "Okay, dinner," he grinned. "I'll meet you here at 7. Don't get lost this time." She watched him walk away down the street, his shirt fluttering slightly in the breeze, and for a moment she forgot all about the lost backpack, the missed bus, the hours of panic. Because somehow, The most unexpected day of her life had just become the one she couldn't stop smiling about. Brielle adjusted the strap of her sandals as she stepped out of the hotel lobby into the warm evening air. The sky had softened into hues of coral and violet, and Ravello's ancient walls glowed in the last light of day. She hadn't expected to feel nervous after all. It was just dinner, but her pulse betrayed her. Maybe it was because she hadn't been on a proper date in almost a year. Or maybe it was because this wasn't just any man. Colton waited exactly where he said he'd be, leaning casually against a wrought iron post near the boutique with his hands tucked in his trouser pockets. He wore a navy linen blazer over an open white shirt and dark slacks. Clean cut, effortless, yet distinctly polished in a way that didn't come from a rental suitcase. He looked like someone who belonged in every room he entered. "You clean up well," he said the moment his eyes met hers. "I didn't pack for spontaneous fine dining," Brielle admitted, smoothing down the hem of her simple black dress. "But this was the least wrinkled thing I had." "You look stunning," Colton said plainly, like he wasn't interested in cleverness. "Come on." "I made a reservation." They walked past the main piazza, away from the crowd, until they reached a narrow alley illuminated by golden sconces. At the end stood a discreet gate, where a man in a suit greeted them by name and ushered them into a stone courtyard filled with flickering candlelight and soft violin music. Brielle paused. "This is not a tourist restaurant." Colton glanced at her knowingly. "It's not on any map. How did you—" "I've been coming here a while. They remember me." A waiter pulled out her chair and poured chilled, sparkling water into delicate crystal glasses. The menu was handwritten on parchment, no prices. Brielle tried not to stare. "Is this your usual vacation style?" she asked once they were alone. "Not exactly. I'm here for a different reason this time." She tilted her head. "What kind of reason?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, elbows on the table. "My father passed away 6 months ago. He used to bring my mother here when they were still speaking. I thought it might be good to see this place for myself." Brielle's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "Thanks," he said, his voice low. "I didn't really know how to grieve him. We weren't close. But he left behind a lot responsibilities, expectations." "Is that why you're in real estate?" Colton looked away for a moment, then back at her. "It's complicated. I'm technically in acquisitions, but there's a lot more to it. Let's just say I didn't exactly choose it. But I'm good at it." The waiter arrived with a platter of hand-rolled pasta in truffle cream, followed by grilled sea bass with lemon caper butter. Every course was a revelation, and yet Brielle could barely focus on the food. Colton was unraveling in front of her, not in a vulnerable way, but in layers, revealing things without appearing to. "Can I ask you something?" he said between bites. "Sure." "What made you pick this trip? Of all the places, why Italy?" She traced the rim of her glass. "My mom always said she wanted to come here. She died before she could. I guess I did it for her, and for me, I needed to do something that felt different than my life." "What is your life?" She laughed softly. "Unremarkable. I work at a library in a small town where the biggest weekly event is the farmers' market. I used to think I was okay with that, but lately, I don't know, I've been wondering if I've settled too early." Colton sat back, watching her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "You don't strike me as someone who settles. You don't know me." "Not yet." They walked back slowly after dinner, the streets quieter now, the stars visible above the rooftops. At the edge of a stone railing overlooking the sea, Colton stopped. "I was supposed to leave for Capri tomorrow," he said, "but I'm thinking I might stay." Brielle turned to him, surprised. "Because of dinner? Because of you?" She looked at him, unsure whether to laugh or run. "You don't even know who I am." "I know enough," he said, stepping closer. "You're not like anyone I've met in a long time. You say what you think. You don't pretend. It's rare." "And what exactly do you think happens if you stay?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'd like to find out." Brielle stared at him, heart thudding louder than the distant waves. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't planned for any of it. But the way he looked at her, like he saw past the dress, past the nerves, past the girl who had gotten herself stranded, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't so ordinary after all. "You're impulsive," she said. "I prefer decisive," she smiled. Then I guess you'd better find a hotel that's not fully booked. I already have a place, he said simply. It's not small, she arched an eyebrow. Of course it isn't. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. They parted at the entrance of her hotel. He didn't try to kiss her, didn't ask to come in. He just reached for her hand and held it for a moment, long enough for her fingers to memorize the shape of his. Sleep well, Brielle, he said. And then he walked away, leaving her wondering if the most unexpected day of her life had somehow just become the beginning of something even more impossible. The next morning, Brielle stood barefoot on the tiny balcony of her hotel room, watching the town stir to life below. A bell tolled from a distant chapel, and the scent of fresh bread drifted up from a nearby bakery. She still hadn't processed it all, the dinner, the view, the way Colton had looked at her under the stars like she was the only person in the world that mattered. And now he was staying. Her phone, finally charged after a night plugged into an adapter she'd borrowed from the concierge, buzzed on the dresser. There was no message, no missed calls. She wasn't even sure why she expected one. He'd said he wanted to see her again, and yet here she was, pacing her room like a teenager. A knock came at the door. She froze. "Room service," a voice called. Brielle opened the door cautiously, only to find a young hotel employee with a silver tray and a folded note. "I didn't order anything," she said. "It's been arranged," he replied, setting the tray on the small table by the window and handing her the card. She waited until he left before opening it. "Meet me at the marina. Noon, wear something you can breathe in." See, she stared at the signature. No last name, just the letter. And yet there was something about it that made her chest tighten. By noon, the sun blazed overhead, and Brielle walked down to the marina in a cotton sundress and sandals, trying not to overthink what was waiting at the docks. She expected a boat, maybe something modest. What she didn't expect was the sleek, gleaming yacht anchored near the edge of the harbor, its name Orion etched in gold across the hull. Colton stood near the boarding ramp in khaki pants and a white shirt rolled to the elbows, his sunglasses shading his eyes. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, but his smile was real, unguarded. "You weren't kidding," she said, eyeing the yacht. He held out his hand. "Come aboard." "Colton," she said, not moving. "That thing is the size of my apartment building." "It's not mine," he replied, then added, "Technically, it belongs to the company. I borrow it when I need to disappear." Brielle took his hand and stepped onto the deck, heart pounding. The interior was even more surreal: polished wood, glass walls, and a table already set with fresh fruit, chilled wine, and a spread of Italian meats and cheeses. They sailed along the coast, the cliffs rising like ancient sentinels as the yacht cut through the water. Brielle sat on a cushioned bench, her legs tucked under her, while Colton poured her a glass of Pinot Grigio. "So," she said, taking a sip, "you're not just some guy with a good travel agent." He leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "No." "I'm not." "Then what are you?" He didn't answer right away. The sea breeze ruffled his hair and his jaw was tight, like he was choosing his words carefully. "My name's not Colton Vale," he said finally. She blinked. "Excuse me, it's Colton Ashford. My family owns Ashford Holdings. Hotels, property, resorts, probably half the places you've seen ads for in airports." Brielle stared at him, stunned. "That's why the restaurant knew your name," he nodded. "I don't usually tell people, not unless I trust them." She set her glass down. "So why tell me now?" "Because I didn't want to keep pretending." He moved closer, slow and deliberate. "Last night wasn't a game, Brielle. I meant every word, but if this is going to be anything real, you deserve the truth." She looked out at the sea, her thoughts racing. "You're not what I expected. You aren't either." "Why me?" she asked, turning to face him. "You could be with anyone." "I don't want anyone," he said. "I want the girl who got left behind and still managed to smile. The woman who doesn't care about who I am or what I own." Brielle's breath hitched. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," he said quietly. "Just tell me if you want to be here." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked to the edge of the deck, letting the wind whip through her hair. The coastline shimmered in the distance, and somewhere behind her, Colton waited. "I don't usually do this," she said, not turning around. "I don't fall for people I barely know. I don't trust easy." And I definitely don't get on yachts with men who reveal they're billionaires halfway through a vacation. I get it, she turned, but I'm here, and I want to know what happens next. He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, cupping her face with both hands. So do I. Then he kissed her slow, steady, like he wasn't in a rush to win her over but rather to savor the moment. It was only when they broke apart that she whispered, I still can't believe I missed my bus and ended up here. He smiled. Best missed bus in history. They spent the rest of the afternoon anchored in a hidden cove, diving off the yacht into clear sapphire water, laughing over stories about their childhoods, and sharing secrets neither had offered to anyone else in years. Everything about it felt impossible and yet somehow real. By the time they returned to the marina, the sun had dipped low, casting golden beams across the water. Colton walked her back to her hotel, fingers brushing hers, but he didn't ask to come up. I have to leave tomorrow, Brielle said as they reached her door. The tour's heading north, then cancel it. I can't. Yes, you can stay just a little longer, she hesitated. Colton, don't decide now, sleep on it. He stepped back, hands in his pockets. But if you're not on that bus tomorrow, I'll be waiting. And then he turned and walked away, leaving Brielle standing in the doorway, her heart pounding with a question she suddenly wasn't sure how to answer. The morning mist still clung to the cobblestones when Brielle stepped into the piazza, her rolling suitcase trailing behind her. A soft breeze stirred the hem of her skirt as she paused beside the fountain, staring down the road where the tour bus idled, engine humming low. She could already hear the guide giving instructions to a few early risers, their chatter filling the quiet air. The rest of the group would be arriving soon. She had just enough time to decide. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her bag. Across the square, a cafe owner arranged chairs and a Vespa zipped past, its rider disappearing into the hills beyond. The town was waking up, but Brielle's thoughts were somewhere else on the man who had asked her to stay. Not with promises, not with pressure, just a simple choice. Behind her, footsteps slowed. You're not on the bus yet. She turned to find Colton standing a few paces away, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. His blazer was gone, replaced by a charcoal jacket she hadn't seen before. His expression didn't waver. I wasn't sure you'd come, Brielle said. I wasn't sure you'd be here. I needed to see it for myself, the bus, the people, the life I was supposed to go back to. Colton nodded once, and she looked at the bus again, then at him. It's still there, but I'm not. He stepped closer. Are you saying you're staying? I'm saying I'm not leaving. Not yet. Relief flickered across his features, but he didn't move to touch her. I booked a place just outside town, he said. Old villa up on the ridge. It's quiet, private. I was hoping you might want to see it. She gestured to her suitcase. I brought everything. He reached for the handle. Then let's go. The ride to the villa wound through steep roads lined with olive groves. When they arrived, Brielle stood in silence as the iron gate opened to reveal a terraced estate blanketed in ivy and bougainvillea. The house was modest by billionaire standards, but still breathtaking sun-washed stone, arched windows, and a wraparound veranda that overlooked the cliffs. She walked to the edge of the garden, where the wind carried the scent of rosemary and sea salt. It doesn't feel real. It isn't, not really, Colton said beside her. But maybe that's okay. She turned to him, studying his face in the morning light, tired, honest, unguarded in a way that hadn't been there when they first met. What happens when you go back to New York? She asked. He took a deep breath. I've been asking myself the same thing. The truth is, I don't want to go back to how things were. I don't want to keep building a life that doesn't fit me anymore. And what does fit? You, he said simply. You make me feel like I can choose something different. Brielle's throat tightened. What if I'm not ready to change everything? You don't have to. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. I found this in the villa's library, thought of you. She opened it carefully. The pages were blank. You want me to write in it. I want you to fill it. With whatever comes next, she ran her fingers over the cover. It feels like a beginning. It is. They spent the next few days in a rhythm that felt startlingly natural. They wandered through hilltop villages, shared quiet breakfasts on the terrace, and read aloud from poetry books they found tucked in the villa's shelves. He taught her how to drive the old Fiat parked in the garage badly, and she painted a watercolor of the coastline that he framed without asking. Every moment deepened something between them, layered it with quiet certainty. One evening, as dusk wrapped the villa in lavender light, Colton returned from a call with his assistant. Brielle sat on the veranda, watching the horizon where the sea met the sky. He sat beside her, silent for a long moment. "They're asking when I'll be back," he said finally. "There's a deal I was supposed to close next week." She looked at him. "Are you going?" He shook his head. "Not yet." Brielle leaned into his side. "How long can you stay?" "As long as it takes." "For what?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, square box. Her breath caught before she even saw what was inside. "This isn't a proposal," he said quietly. "Not yet. I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm asking you to build something with me, a life, wherever you want, however long it takes." She opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold ring set with a single sapphire, a deep ocean blue she hadn't seen anywhere but in his eyes. "I don't need an answer now," he added. Brielle closed the box and looked at him. "You already have it," he exhaled, and for the first time since they met, she saw the weight lift from his shoulders completely. Later that night, music drifted from the villa's old stereo while they danced on the worn stone patio beneath strands of hanging lights. There were no crowds, no cameras, no grand announcement, just two people who had found each other in the most unlikely place. As the stars emerged one by one, he pulled her closer and whispered against her hair. "I was never supposed to be in Ravello that day," she smiled against his chest. "Neither was I." He tilted her face up to his. "But now I can't imagine my life without you in it." She kissed him in answer. And just like that, what had started as a missed bus and a borrowed afternoon became the beginning of everything they never knew they were waiting for. A week later, the villa had begun to feel like a home, not a vacation hideaway or a borrowed fairy tale, but something real. Mornings were slower now, filled with long stretches of silence punctuated by laughter, cooking together in the tiny kitchen and lingering over espresso while the world turned gently outside their window. Colton stood in the courtyard garden, sleeves rolled up, carefully sketching lines on the back of a folded blueprint. A local architect had driven up from Salerno that morning, and now the two men were engaged in quiet conversation, gesturing toward the old stone guest house at the edge of the property. From the veranda, Brielle watched with a quiet kind of awe. She stepped down into the sun, wiping her hands on a towel from the kitchen. "You're planning something." Colton looked up, the sunlight catching in his hair. "I might be. Should I be nervous?" He folded the blueprint and walked toward her. "Only if the idea of a library and art studio built into the guest house terrifies you," she blinked. "What? I thought maybe you'd want a place to write, to paint, somewhere that's yours." Her pulse fluttered. "You're building me a studio, I'm building us a future." "That's just one part of it." She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "You're not going back, are you?" "I've already handed off half my board responsibilities," he said. "I'll still work, but not like before. I don't want that rhythm anymore." "I want something different." "You're letting go of all that?" she asked, eyes searching his. "I'm making room for something better." They stood there for a moment, the breeze shifting through the rosemary bushes behind them. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the ring box he had given her. She opened it, took out the sapphire ring and slid it onto her finger. "I'm ready now." Colton didn't speak. He simply wrapped his arms around her and held her tightly, forehead pressed to hers. No more questions. No more decisions. That night they hosted a small dinner on the veranda. The architect returned, along with the chef from the restaurant in Ravello who brought fresh seafood and truffle risotto. Candles flickered in glass jars along the stone railing, and music drifted in from a vintage speaker tucked near the kitchen door. When dessert had been cleared and conversation had settled into quiet contentment, Colton stood and took Brielle's hand. "I have one more thing," he said. She followed him through an archway wrapped in jasmine vines, into the garden where small lanterns hung from the trees, casting a soft amber glow. In the center stood a table draped in white linen with a single envelope resting on it. Brielle looked at him. Another surprise. Open it, he said. She unfolded the paper and scanned the contents, her breath caught. You bought the villa? I didn't want to leave it, he said simply. And I didn't want you to ever feel like this was temporary. Her eyes filled. You bought a house for us? I bought a home for us. She reached for him, and he caught her in his arms, lifting her slightly from the ground as she laughed against his shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in the scent of lemon blossoms and the warmth of something that had taken root too quickly to explain, but deeply enough to last. The next morning, they woke to find the first letter from her sister waiting in the inbox. I told her everything, Brielle said as she read it aloud. She wants to visit. Colton leaned back against the headboard, arms folded behind his head. She's welcome any time. I think she's still in shock, he smiled. So am I. Later that week, they drove into Positano and stopped at a boutique on the cliffside. Colton waited patiently while Brielle disappeared into the back with the shopkeeper. When she emerged, she wore a soft ivory dress that fell just above her ankles, her hair pinned up with pearl combs. He stood and held out his hand. You look like a dream. You look like you're about to cry, she teased. I might. They walked down to a small stone chapel tucked behind a lemon grove. A retired priest greeted them at the gate, and in the quiet of that sun-drenched clearing with only the sea and sky as witnesses, they exchanged vows written in a language only they understood, one not of promises, but of choices made freely, daily, without fear. They spent the evening on the terrace of their villa, barefoot, wrapped together in a blanket as the stars appeared overhead. I used to think love was this thing that happened to other people, Brielle said softly. Something you had to chase or earn. Colton kissed her temple. Turns out it just finds you when you stop chasing everything else. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. Are you happy? He turned to her, his eyes steady. I never knew I could be. Years passed, but the rhythm of that first summer never left them. They worked together on local restoration projects, started a cultural foundation that brought art and literature into rural towns, and opened a small retreat center on the villa grounds. They hosted friends, family, and eventually, children who ran through the olive groves and filled the house with laughter and chaos. But every evening, without fail, they returned to the same bench overlooking the cliffs, where they would sit in silence, hands entwined, watching the sun melt into the horizon. And in those quiet moments, they never once forgot the day she missed her bus. Because it wasn't the mistake that changed everything, it was what they chose to do with it.